Major point number 3. Today we live under the commandments of Christ, not the 10 Commandments. Friends, today we live under a better covenant. Hebrews chapter 8 and verse 6 says, "But now he has obtained a more excellent ministry, inasmuch as he is also mediator of a better covenant, which was established on better promises." Now, sometimes when it's pointed out to people that we do not live under the 10 Commandments today, people will respond and say something like this. They will say, "So you believe we can worship idols today? You believe we can profane the Lord's name? You believe we can be disobedient to parents? You believe we can commit murder and adultery?" But friends, that's not the logical or the scriptural conclusion here. The 10 Commandments are not the only source of moral authority. We certainly do not teach that it's all right for men to engage in these sins. In fact, we teach that these things are wrong. But the reason that we teach that they are wrong is because the law of Christ teaches it, not because the law of Moses teaches it. As a matter of fact, 9 out of the 10 Commandments are repeated in some form in the New Testament, the law of Christ, which is applicable to us today. For instance, commandment number 1 and commandment number 2 prohibited having other gods and commanded that we refrain from idolatry. In the New Testament, Matthew chapter 4 and verse 10, Jesus commanded that we worship and serve God only. Acts chapter 10, 25 and 26, Peter forbade a man to worship him. Colossians 2:18, Revelation 19 and verse 10, angel worship is prohibited. 1 Corinthians 6, 9 and 10, Galatians 5 and verse 20, Paul forbade idolatry. And so we worship God only, and we refrain from idolatry. But it's not because Moses taught it or because the 10 Commandments taught it. It's because Christ did. Commandment number 3 forbade taking the Lord's name in vain. In Matthew chapter 6 and verse 9, Jesus taught that God's name is to be hallowed. Ephesians 4:29, Colossians 4:6 teach against the wrong kind of language. And so we respect the name of God, but not because of what Moses said, but because of what our lawgiver says in the New Testament. Commandment number 4 commands keeping the Sabbath day. Now, Saturday was the Sabbath day. It was to be a day of rest and reverence. It was a sign between God and Israel. It is not found in the New Testament in the law of Christ, and so we don't teach that one. We don't practice that one. Commandment number 5 taught respect and honor for parents. Ephesians 6, 1 through 3 in the New Testament says, "Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother." And so we teach it. But again, it's not because the law of Moses taught it, it's because the law of Christ does. Commandments 6 through 10 legislated against murder and adultery and theft and lying and bearing false witness and covetousness. In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus spoke against murder and adultery. Romans 13 and verse 9, Paul wrote, "For the commandments, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not murder, you shall not steal, you shall not bear false witness, you shall not covet, and if there is any other commandment, are all summed up in the saying, namely, you shall love your neighbor as yourself." Now, we could go on and on citing New Testament verses that prohibit immoral behavior, but the point is this: we are not free to commit these evils. But friends, it's not because Moses or the 10 Commandments said so. It's because Christ and His law says it today.